Hey guys, tonight we step across the threshold of a Tudor home, the sort of timber-framed cottage you've probably seen in storybooks or National Trust postcards. From the outside it looks charming, even quaint, with its black beams and white plaster walls, maybe a thatched roof that makes you imagine warm hearths and cozy evenings. But once you duck your head under the low lintel and actually come inside, you'll notice that comfort in the 16th century came with a few strings attached. The walls might creak pleasantly, the fire might snap merrily, but beneath the beams and rushes lurked an entire rogues gallery of hidden killers. Sugary delicacies that rotted your teeth, tennies that could collapse without warning, water buckets heavy enough to drown you, and home remedies that seemed more like experiments gone wrong than medicine. You probably won't survive this little overnight visit, but at least you'll drift off to sleep while we explore the dangers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere far from Tudor England, tell me your location and your local time down in the comments. I love to imagine where everyone is dozing off. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in a bed that feels like it's trying to trap you. The mattress is not really a mattress as you'd know it. It's a lumpy sack of straw, perhaps sprinkled with dried lavender to hide the smell of mold. Every time you shift, a stalk jabs your ribs, and the thin blanket hardly keeps out the morning chill. The first sensation that hits you, though, isn't the cold but the sweetness on the air. Someone downstairs has started breakfast, and what you're smelling is sugar being broken up with a hammer. That's right. Before you even manage to rub your eyes, you're about to learn how sugar became the pride and peril of Tudor households. In the centuries before, sugar was a treasure rarer than gold. A medieval banquet might show off a single precious lump of the stuff, something only the wealthiest lords could afford. But in Tudor times the calculus shifted, and suddenly even the so-called middling-sort artisans, merchants, prosperous farmers could sprinkle the white crystals on their bread, or stir them into their ale. The reason was grim. The explosion of the transatlantic slave trade and new plantations in the Caribbean drove down the price. So the sweet, crystalline luxury of sugar was now cheap enough to show off in middle-class homes. And what better way to make your neighbors jealous than to disguise an entire plate of sugar as bacon or almonds? Picture it, you've invited guests to dinner, and at the end you unveil a platter of roasted nuts or sliced ham. They bite in, only to realize every piece is spun from sugar, dyed with cochineal for that meaty red hue, or dusted with cinnamon for a nut-brown sheen. Everyone laughs, everyone marvels, and your reputation for fashionable taste soars. The irony, of course, is that the very substance you flaunt as a sign of refinement is gnawing away at your teeth, quite literally from the inside out. If you leaned close to the looking glass in your borrowed Tudor chamber, you'd see the rot setting in. Black spots creeping along the enamel, molars crumbling to brown mush. The ache you feel when you chew isn't from a loose filling, dentistry as you know it doesn't exist yet, but from an abscess forming right under the gum line. Historians still argue whether the Tudors understood the full link between sugar and decay, but the evidence is written plainly in their skeletal remains. Archaeologists in London have unearthed thousands of skulls, and the contrast is striking: medieval jaws with pristine white teeth, and Tudor jaws with gaping cavities, roots exposed like tiny wooden posts in a crumbling fence. Now, imagine yourself at breakfast. A servant presents you with a salad of lemons doused in powdered sugar. A sweet indulgence, yes. But what follows is less pleasant. You reach for a toothpick carved from bone to scrape away the sticky film, then rinse your mouth with rose water, sometimes laced with honey, which makes matters worse. If stains persist, the family remedy is to grind coral or pumice into a gritty paste and rub it directly on your teeth, as though scouring a pan. It works in the sense that it removes discoloration. Unfortunately, it also removes your enamel, leaving your teeth defenseless against the onslaught of sugar. The pain is constant now, throbbing at your temples, radiating down your jaw. But you smile anyway because that's the Tudor way. Sugar isn't just a flavor, it's a fashion statement. Even when your teeth fall out, you still pop kissing comforts, tiny perfumed candies designed to sweeten your breath before leaning in for a social peck. The irony, they're sugar-based too. Imagine covering a grease fire with more grease. It's that sort of logic. And if infection takes hold, spreading from tooth to bone to bloodstream, you may not last long enough to enjoy another banquet. Some death records from the 1590s list bad teeth as the official cause. It's a strangely blunt epitaph, but one that reminds you this sweet powder was as much a weapon as a treat. You might think, well, at least I can cut back. But sugar is sly. Your body craves it not just for taste, but for the way it meddles with your brain chemistry. Every spoonful boosts serotonin, the same neurotransmitter that gives you that floaty, contented feeling when you've just sunk into bed. It's not unlike a drug, drawing you back for one more candied rose, one more goblet of sweetened wine. You drift in and out of this cycle, not realizing you've signed up for a centuries-long addiction. The Tudors couldn't possibly know that elevated sugar levels predispose the body to diabetes, or that bacteria from rotten teeth could travel through the bloodstream, attacking organs one by one. They simply knew that the banquet table glittered with white gold, and that it felt wonderful in the moment. By now you're yawning, though maybe not entirely from drowsiness. Your jaw aches, your temples throb. Somewhere below stairs, someone is still hammering at a sugar loaf, and the sound echoes like a dull drumbeat through your skull. You wonder whether anyone in this household ever questioned the price of sweetness, or whether they simply accepted the decay as the cost of fashion. Historians still argue whether the taste for sugar was born of ignorance or willful indulgence. Either way, you can taste the danger on your tongue already, grainy, crystalline, and irresistible. Your jaw is sore, your gums feel tender, and you realize the ache is becoming part of daily life. Breakfast is over, the sugar loaves hammered and sieved, the candied roses gobbled, and now the household shifts toward the routines of the day. You trail your hand along the cool plaster wall, black beams overhead, and shuffle toward the fire. The warmth is welcome, but the glow comes with its own set of hazards. This house, with its chimneys that seem so modern and clever, is about to show you another hidden killer. Picture yourself settling on a stool near the hearth, poking at the logs as they spit and pop. Before the invention of the chimney, smoke would simply billow through the hall, seeping out a hole in the roof if you were lucky. Your eyes watered constantly, your lungs grew raw, and everything you owned reeked of ash. The chimney changed that, or at least it promised to. A neat brick tower pulled the smoke upward and out, allowing rooms to stay clear, even permitting a second story to be built above. For the first time, privacy was possible. You could eat in one room, cook in another, sleep upstairs. A dream come true, right? Except dreams can catch fire. Literally, in their rush to adopt the latest architectural fashion, Tudor builders often cut corners. A chimney might be framed in timber, stuffed with wattle and daub, or lined with mortar so fragile that the first hot blaze cracked it. Sparks slipped through gaps and smouldered silently for hours, waiting until midnight to lick their way into thatch. One minute you're asleep, snoring into your straw mattress. The next, your rafters explode with orange light. Entire streets went up this way. Stratford-upon-Avon lost half its houses in one inferno, and the other half a year later. You glance nervously at the fire. It seems contained, but is it? The draw, the suction that pulls smoke up the flue, doesn't always behave. If the fireplace opening is too wide, the smoke sulks, hanging stubbornly in the chimney until it ignites in a rush. Imagine thick black soot accumulating over weeks, a greasy layer clinging to the interior. Then, one evening, the heat reaches a tipping point. Whoosh! The entire chimney becomes a torch. It's dramatic enough to impress Shakespeare himself, though you probably won't survive to commission a sonnet about it. Historians still argue whether people of the time understood the necessity of cleaning their chimneys. Certainly pamphlets and ordinances eventually demanded sweeping 4 times a year. But in the early days, how would you know? You just built the thing, marveled at the smoke rising, and assumed the problem was solved. Unfortunately, the problem was only hiding, waiting to emerge as a roaring fire, or just as deadly, a sudden collapse. Yes, collapse. For while the flames were obvious, another danger lurked in the very bricks themselves. Tudor bricks were often poorly fired, prone to fracture under heat. Wood burns at about 1,000 degrees Celsius, coal hotter still, and those bricks simply couldn't handle the stress. The mortar swelled, the structure cracked, and one day the chimney came crashing down. Records tell of men rushing bravely to put out fires, only to be crushed beneath falling masonry. It wasn't the blaze that finished them, but the so-called miracle of brickwork. Imagine standing in your borrowed Tudor parlour, hearing a faint groan from above. Dust sprinkles down. You tilt your head back, just in time to see the wall buckle. There's no warning siren, no safety inspection, just a thunderous collapse, leaving you coughing in rubble, perhaps pinned under a half-ton of brick that yesterday seemed so permanent. Comfort, it turns out, can be as treacherous as discomfort. And yet, despite the risks, chimneys spread like wildfire, no pun intended, because the promise of warmth and privacy was irresistible. Families crowded around the hearth, children clutching wooden toys, mothers stirring pots of pottage, fathers nodding in smoky satisfaction. This was progress. This was the modern home. Never mind the occasional collapse, the suffocating smoke, or the neighbor's roof blazing into the night. You sit closer to the fire, mesmerized by the embers, and your eyes begin to sting. You cough, a low, scratchy rasp, and suddenly you realize the air isn't as clear as it should be. The draw isn't strong enough tonight. The smoke lingers, thickening, until your lungs protest. You wave a hand in front of your face, but the haze curls stubbornly, seeping into your hair, your clothes, your very pores. Tomorrow you'll still smell it, even if you bathe, though bathing, in this century, is not a daily habit. And here's the strange part. As much as the chimney was meant to banish smoke, people still associated the smell with home. The faint tang of soot became part of domestic life, part of what made a Tudor dwelling feel warm and lived in. A modern visitor like you might choke and sputter, but a Tudor would shrug, eyes watering, and say, "That's comfort." You're not so sure. Your throat feels raw, your teeth still ache, and the fire that seemed cozy now looks like a predator waiting for its chance. You lean back, close your eyes, and think of how many households, entire towns even, succumbed to this combination of poor engineering and misplaced confidence. Progress, it seems, is never quite as safe as it promises. And as you drift, the crackle of the fire no longer soothes you. It whispers of sparks in the thatch, of beams ready to groan and give way, of bricks poised to tumble. You clutch the blanket tighter, But deep down you know in a Tudor home the real danger isn't what you can see, it's what you can't. You cough again, wave a hand in front of your face, and decide a breath of outside air might do you good. You shuffle toward the doorway, duck under the lintel, and step into the yard, where the air is damp and earthy. For a moment it feels like relief. No more smoke, no sweet tang of sugar rotting your gums, just fresh morning air. But remember, in Tudor England, stepping outside doesn't mean stepping into safety. The most ordinary chore, fetching water, might be the one that does you in. There's no tap to twist, no plumbing humming behind the walls. Every drop this household needs must be carried in, bucket by bucket, from the nearest pond, stream, or well. The bucket itself is rough wood bound with iron, heavy, even before it's full. Once you fill it, the weight digs into your shoulder, sloshing cold water down your front. Do this a dozen times before breakfast, and you'll know what daily labor really means. And that's just to have enough for cooking and drinking. You'll need more for laundry, washing dishes, watering animals. The entire day revolves around the core of water. And water, as it turns out, has a wicked sense of humor. Fetching it means lingering by slippery banks, balancing on planks stretched across streams, or leaning precariously into deep stone wells. One false step and you're in. You might think, so what? It's just a pond, just a shallow ditch. But statistics from Tudor coroners tell a different story. Nearly 40% of accidental deaths were drownings. Let that sink in. Almost half of all those who died by mishap met their end in water. You crouch beside a stream to rinse your hands, your wool sleeve dragging into the current. It soaks up water like a sponge. Wool has a marvelous trick. It can absorb up to 1.5 times its own weight without feeling wet, which makes it cozy in drizzle. But tumble into a pond wearing wool, and suddenly your clothing becomes an anchor. You gasp as the cold hits your chest, your body's reflex dragging in air, or if your head's under, dragging in water. Your lungs seize, your throat spasms, and the weight of your sodden garments pins you down. You thrash, kick, claw at the mud, but the more you fight, the heavier everything feels. Historians still argue whether the Tudors understood hypothermia or cold shock response. They knew water killed, certainly. Their coroners' rolls are full of cases, like Ursula Redsole, who toppled off a plank while washing a petticoat in 1556, or Elizabeth Bennet, who leaned too far into a moat to collect wart leaves and never surfaced. One man relieved himself on the edge of a ditch, slipped, and drowned where he crouched. These aren't the grand sweeping tragedies of battlefields or plagues. They're the quiet, humiliating ends of daily chores. You stand by the pond now, the memory of those names clinging like damp mist. The women of the household are stooped over washboards, knuckles red from the cold, skirts dragging in the mud. They laugh, chat, and scold children. But beneath it all is the unspoken knowledge that one misstep could end it all. Wells are dangerous too. Children lean too far, topple in, adults strain with the bucket rope, lose their balance and tumble after it. A well cover is a luxury most villages don't yet have, though toward the end of the century, people began fencing them or adding pumps. Too late for those already gone. You imagine yourself fetching a bucket, balancing it against your hip as you trudge back to the house. Your arms ache, your back throbs, and you're careful, so careful not to slip. Yet even as you step inside, dripping onto the rushes strewn across the floor, the danger lingers. This water will be poured into pottage, into ale, into every meal, and it isn't clean. It carries the runoff from nearby fields, the waste from animals, the filth that drains through every ditch. It is both life and lurking death, brought in lovingly, ladled out generously, consumed without hesitation. You sit again by the fire, shivering from your short trip, and realize the Tudor home is never really sealed. Outside creeps inside. Water, animals, mud, all come with you, and so do their risks. The idea of a home as a safe, enclosed space is centuries away. For now, the boundary between inside and out is porous. The very act of living means constant exposure to the elements, constant risk. As your eyes close, you hear the bucket creak against its handle, dripping steadily, as though counting down the seconds. You picture the coroner's ledgers filled with drowning cases, lines of ink that testify to the banality of death by water. 1,000 quiet tragedies. One bucket at a time, you pull the blanket tighter, but the sound of dripping stays with you, a reminder that safety, even in the simplest chores, was never guaranteed. You huddle back inside, damp from the trip to the pond, and notice how the air of the Tudor house clings to you differently now. The smoke is one thing, but beneath it lies another layer, the smell of the very floor you're standing on. At first you might think it's earthy, a little rustic, the way an old barn smells, but give it a moment and the truth seeps in. This is filth. This is a floor covered in rushes, reeds and straw, all laid down to soften the tread, to mask the dirt, and to give the impression of coziness. But cozy they are not. They are rotting, decaying, layered with months of spilled ale, greasy drippings, and the occasional splash from that chamber pot someone emptied just a little too close to the hearth. You look down. The rushes are brown at the edges, brittle in some places, swampy in others. Mixed in with them are chicken feathers, fish bones, and whatever scraps yesterday's dinner left behind. To make things smell better, families sometimes strew herbs like lavender or mint. At first you might think, refreshing, but now the sweet herbs mingle with the rot, creating a bouquet of contradictions. Imagine potpourri left to ferment in a damp cellar. That's what you're breathing right now. You take a step, and something crunches. Is it a hazelnut shell? A shard of bone? Hard to tell. Rats dart in and out of these rushes, happy to snack on whatever lies beneath. Their droppings mix seamlessly into the floor covering. Children crawl through it. Pets nose around in it. And you, with your delicate 21st century sensibilities, are suddenly hyper-aware that your socks, or in this case your hose, are now filthy beyond redemption. The human contributions are worse still. A Tudor chamber pot is a ceramic bowl tucked under the bed, a convenience for the midnight hour. In the morning, its contents are tossed, sometimes carefully into a gutter, sometimes less carefully onto the rushes. In London, ordinances were constantly issued against people emptying their night soil out of windows, but you can imagine how effective that was. Inside, though, Erasmus himself complained of English houses stinking from the floor up. He wasn't exaggerating. He stayed in homes where the rushes hadn't been changed in years. Years. That means layer upon layer of waste, sealed only by the occasional sprig of mint. Historians still argue whether every home was quite this foul. Perhaps Erasmus, ever the cranky foreign guest, exaggerated for effect. Some wealthier houses probably did change their rushes more often, even seasonally, tossing out the old mats and laying fresh ones. But even fresh rushes begin to rot within days, and most ordinary families lack the luxury of regular replacement. If your roof leaked, as many did, the floor became a swamp. If your fire smoked, the floor absorbed it, mingling soot with damp. It was a compost heap, masquerading as a carpet. You imagine yourself lying down to rest. The straw mattress under you feels prickly enough, but you keep smelling something sharper, an acrid tang. That's the chamber pot again, discreetly tucked nearby. It hasn't been emptied yet. A child whimpers in the corner, scratching at fleas. You swat at your own skin and realize the bedding crawls with them. No wonder outbreaks of plague and typhus spread so easily. The vermin had free rein, darting from person to person through the comfort of these makeshift floors. To keep up appearances, households sometimes scattered flowers or even perfume onto the rushes when guests arrived. Imagine trying to disguise a rubbish heap with a spritz of cologne. You step across the threshold into such a room, and at first perhaps you're enchanted, roses on the floor, lavender at your feet. But give it 5 minutes, and the underlying stench rises like a ghost, wrapping itself around you until the roses are no more than a cruel joke. And yet, for all its hazards, the floor is home. Children play here. Women sit spinning flax or carding wool here. Men thump their boots on it after trudging through mud. The floor soaks up history as much as it does filth. Every drop, every crumb, every careless spill becomes part of the household fabric. You wonder whether anyone paused to think about what lay beneath their feet. Maybe they grew immune to the smell, the way you stop noticing a candle burning after a while. To them it wasn't filth, it was simply life. You glance around and realize the walls don't offer much reprieve either. Whitewashed plaster flakes away, revealing laths riddled with insects. A thatch roof above harbors birds, insects, and worse. Even your drinking vessel, a wooden cup, might carry bacteria deep in its grain, impossible to scrub clean with cold pond water. The house breathes disease into you, even as it shelters you from the rain. You pull your blanket higher, nose stinging from the mingled odors, and realize you're too tired to fight the discomfort. The filth becomes background noise, part of the hum of Tudor life. You drift, lulled by the crackle of fire, the scuttle of rats, the drip of water outside, until the whole house feels like a living organism, warm, damp, pungent, and faintly hostile. It shelters you, yes, but it also waits, patient and quiet, to claim you. Your blanket scratches your chin, your eyes sting from smoke and damp. But now someone in the household calls you to the kitchen garden. It seems harmless enough, a small patch of earth just beyond the door, neatly divided into beds. This is where Tudor homes tried to wrestle with the dangers of daily life using herbs, plants, and whatever knowledge or superstition filtered down through the generations. You step outside again, the smell of mint and tansy stronger here, though it doesn't quite wash away the stench that clings to your hose. This is the domain of cures, or at least things that pretended to be cures, and as you soon discover, many of them were just another way for the Tudor home to kill you softly. You see a woman bent over the patch, plucking sprigs of rosemary, sage, and fennel. These are the household staples, used in cooking, but also in medicine. A sore throat, gargle sage tea. Indigestion, chew fennel seeds. Rosemary was rubbed on the skin to strengthen the heart, and hung above doors to keep away evil spirits. You're urged to sip tansy tea after a heavy meal. It's supposed to calm your stomach. You nod politely, raise the cup, and take a sip. The bitterness nearly folds your tongue in half. Worse, tansy contains toxic compounds that, in high doses, can damage your liver or even kill you. Yet here it's served as casually as peppermint tea. In the corner of the garden, you notice plants with names that sound like a bad joke. Dead man's fingers, foxglove, henbane. Some were known poisons, yet still made their way into treatments. Foxglove, for example, was used for dropsy, swelling of the body. Modern medicine eventually refined it into digitalis, a heart medication. But Tudor dosing wasn't precise. Too little did nothing, too much stopped your heart. Imagine trying to measure a poison by the pinch of your fingers, hoping you guessed correctly. Then there's the meat-based remedies. Someone swears by a broth made from fox lungs and liver, boiled into a thin soup. It's recommended for consumption, what we'd call tuberculosis. The theory? Like cures like. A fox is sly and quick, so perhaps eating fox organs will make your lungs just as cunning. You sip the broth, and it tastes exactly as horrifying as you'd expect. Gamey bitter with a greasy film that clings to your lips. You cough not from illness but from revulsion, and try not to imagine the bacteria swimming in that bowl. Historians still argue how effective these remedies were. Some herbs genuinely contained compounds that soothed pain or reduced fever. Others were dangerous nonsense. And the problem wasn't just what you took, it was how much. Without scales, without chemical knowledge. Dosing was guesswork. One child's fever might ease, another's might end in convulsions. You picture families clinging to these cures because the alternative, doing nothing, felt unbearable. At least a cup of tansy tea showed you were trying. The most popular remedies often had a religious undertone. The herb garden was a place where prayers and plants mixed freely. Holy water sprinkled over marjoram made it twice as effective, or so people believed. Charms and incantations accompanied poultices, as if words themselves could coax the body back to health. You imagine lying on a straw bed, fevered, while someone mutters over you, tucking leaves into your sheets, whispering words half Christian, half pagan. It's both comforting and eerie, as though medicine and magic haven't quite separated yet. And of course, there are the bleedings and purges. A headache? Apply leeches to your temples. Too much black bile in your system? Swallow a concoction of rhubarb root and vinegar until your insides empty themselves in a flood. You'd think people would eventually notice they felt worse afterward, but the belief was strong. Illness was imbalance, and only by draining the body could you restore it. The weakness afterward was seen as proof it had worked. You lean against the garden fence, stomach uneasy from that tansy tea, and realize the household is full of contradictions. These people are deeply practical. They know which herbs soothe, which plants repel fleas, which spices mask bad meat. But they're also swimming in superstition, dosing themselves with poisons because they half believe in magic. The line between cure and killer is razor thin. A child runs past you, clutching a sprig of fever for you to ward off headaches, and you can't help but smile. There's hope here too. Some remedies did work, some knowledge was sound, passed carefully down through generations. It's just that for every soothing sage tea, there was a lethal tansy brew. For every poultice that eased pain, there was a broth that could poison you. You sip again from the cup, taste the bitterness, and wonder if tonight you'll sleep more peacefully or not wake at all. The bitter taste still clings to your tongue when someone whispers a word you've half heard in hushed tones before, the pox. It slithers through the Tudor household, like a rumor you're not supposed to repeat, a shadow that falls across both bedchamber and street. You turn to follow the hush, and soon you're caught in the darker side of domestic life. The bedroom plague that no one dares name too loudly, the disease that reshaped faces, reputations, and even entire dynasties. Syphilis arrived in England toward the end of the 15th century, probably carried by sailors returning from voyages that stretched further than maps were willing to admit. At first it was called the French disease, then passed like a curse from one nationality to the next. The French insisted it was Italian, the Italians said it was Spanish, the Spanish muttered that it was English. Everyone agreed it was someone else's fault. But once it lodged itself in Tudor society, it cared little for blame. It was democratic in the cruelest way, cutting across class from common maid to noble lord. You wake in the middle of the night, fever hot against your temples, shivering despite the damp blanket. Your joints ache, your throat feels raw. Then come the sores, angry and red, first small, then spreading. You glance in the polished pewter plate that doubles as a mirror and see a stranger looking back at you. Your nose swells, your lips crack, and as the disease advances, cartilage erodes, whole noses collapse, faces cave in on themselves. To cover the damage, wealthier victims strap on false noses made of silver, leather, even papier-mâché. They become grotesque masks, worn not for disguise but for shame. And the cure, if you can call it that, is as terrifying as the disease. Mercury, rubbed into the skin as ointment, swallowed in pills, or inhaled as vapor in special sweat huts. The idea was that mercury purged the body of the poison. In practice, it rotted gums, loosened teeth, and poisoned the blood. A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. People quipped centuries later, but the joke was bitterly literal here. Imagine sitting in a small enclosed chamber, coals heating a dish of quicksilver. Steam rises, heavy and metallic, searing your lungs as attendants urge you to breathe deeply. You cough, gag, sweat, and nearly faint. They nod approvingly. It's working. Historians still argue just how devastating syphilis was in the early Tudor period. Some skeletons bear the unmistakable scars of the disease, lesions etched into bone like cruel graffiti. Others suggest the plague burned hottest in its first decades, and then cooled into something slower, less virulent, though no less humiliating. Either way, the disease left its fingerprints all over the age. Think of the gossip in court, whispered behind gloved hands. Was this earl's sudden disappearance due to a flux of humours or something more scandalous? Was that lady's constant illness the work of witches, or the wages of her lover's indiscretion? You, sitting now on the edge of the straw bed, can feel the tension in every glance. No one admits it. Everyone suspects it. The pox was a ghost that haunted households, and once it entered the bedroom, it rarely left without a trace. You pull the blanket higher, trying to hide from it, but it doesn't matter. The disease does not care for privacy. It spreads in shadows, in kisses, in the very intimacy that homes are meant to shelter. The remedies you were offered earlier, the tansy teas, the sage gargles, look harmless in comparison now. Better a bitter stomachache than this slow dissolution of the self. And yet, life carried on. Families whispered, neighbours gossiped, quacks peddled their mercury cures, and churches prayed. Children were still born into households touched by the disease, some carrying signs from birth. The Tudor home was not just a place of comfort and filth, of sugar and smoke. It was also a crucible where desire and death tangled, where love itself could prove fatal. You lie back on the straw, your mind heavy with the metallic tang of mercury, the shameful whispers of neighbours, the cold fact that even the bed meant for rest could become the stage for tragedy. And as your eyelids droop, you realize that in Tudor England, even the simple act of sharing a bed came with risks that could change your face, your future, and your name forever. Morning light filters weakly through the tiny window, and the damp smell of smoke and straw greets you before you even sit up. For a fleeting second, you imagine this home might finally offer a moment of calm, but then someone presses a cup into your hand. The liquid inside is thick, metallic, faintly sweet. You hesitate, sniff, and the truth dawns. Mercury again. The very substance they hope will heal you is the one corroding you from the inside out. Mercury was the Tudor miracle, and the Tudor menace. Physicians swore by it, apothecaries sold it gladly, and sufferers clung to it because there was little else to cling to. It was stirred into ointments, spread across inflamed skin until blisters wept. It was swallowed in neat little doses, each sip promising a purge of the pox, but instead loosening teeth until they rattled like dice. It was vaporized in sweat baths, hot enough to make you faint, the fumes curling into your lungs like invisible claws. You cough, gag, then choke again, all while attendants nod approvingly. This suffering, they insist, is a sign the cure is working. If you're not sick already, these cures will finish the job. Mercury damages the nervous system, clouding your vision, warping your balance, and gnawing away at your memory. Imagine trying to thread a needle. After weeks of mercury treatment, the world tilts, your fingers tremble, even your voice slurs, as if you've drunk too much ale, though you haven't touched a drop. Still, families keep faith in the ritual. Anything is better than letting the pox consume you openly, stripping away dignity along with flesh. And mercury was hardly the only household hazard dressed up as medicine. You hear of powdered pearls mixed into wine to soothe heart palpitations, but mostly they soothe the purse of the apothecary. Crushed emeralds are prescribed for epilepsy, though they pass through the body without leaving so much as a sparkle. Gold leaf is swallowed for strength, and while it glitters in the imagination, it has no effect on the fever coursing through veins. Every cure, it seems, is another danger in disguise. Historians still argue whether Tudor people genuinely believed these remedies worked, or whether they simply clung to hope in the absence of alternatives. Skeptics surely existed, muttering that physicians were quacks and apothecaries little better than thieves. But when faced with illness that ravaged the body and terrified the mind, who wouldn't gamble on the promise of a cure, however dangerous? Even a slim chance seemed better than no chance at all. As you sip the metallic draught, the aftertaste coats your tongue. You try to wash it away with ale, but ale itself is a mixed blessing. It's safer than water boiled in the brewing process at least, but it's consumed at every meal by children and adults alike. It dulls pain, makes conversation lively, and fills the belly, but it also clouds judgment, and perhaps it numbs you to the risks you're constantly surrounded by. Between mercury in the medicine, sugar on the table, soot in the air, and filth on the floor, what's one more indulgence? A neighbor arrives with advice. Hang a charm above the hearth, pray over rosemary sprigs, burn juniper to cleanse the air. You realize medicine here is never purely physical. It's spiritual, social, even theatrical. To be seen trying is sometimes more important than the result. The home becomes a stage where every cough, every concoction, every whispered prayer plays a part in the long, uncertain drama of survival. You retreat back to your straw mattress, head heavy, stomach queasy from mercury and ale. The blanket smells faintly of smoke and sweat. You stare at the ceiling beams, noting the soot stains creeping upward, and wonder whether you're more likely to die of the cure than the disease. And yet, even through the discomfort, there's something oddly soothing in the ritual of it all. The sense that every Tudor household lived in this balance, perched between danger and faith. You close your eyes, and the metallic tang lingers. The dangers of the Tudor home are no longer shocking. They're expected, ordinary, woven into daily life. And perhaps that is the greatest danger of all, when poison, filth, and fire become so normal that you stop noticing them and drift quietly, almost comfortably, toward sleep. The fire has burned low, embers glowing faintly red beneath a crust of ash, when you realize the Tudor home still has more lessons to teach. You've tasted the sweetness that rots your teeth, breathed smoke that singes your lungs, swallowed cures that corrode your nerves, but perhaps the most relentless dangers are the small, everyday companions you never asked for. The house is alive with vermin. At first you hear them, the faint skitter of tiny claws across the rafters, the scratch of teeth against wood, the whisper of something darting under the rushes. Then you see them, rats bold as neighbors, sniffing at crumbs on the floor, whiskers twitching as they drag scraps into shadows. You flinch, but the Tudors hardly do. Rats are simply part of the household chorus, tolerated unless they grow too brazen. Cats prowl, dogs snap, traps are set, but the rats always return, resilient and clever. And where rats thrive, fleas and lice follow. You scratch your arm, then your scalp, then the inside of your elbow, and realize you've joined the endless scratching chorus of Tudor life. Your bedding crawls with lice, your cloak harbors fleas, and your hair seems to move of its own accord. Comb after comb, knit after knit, the battle never ends. Children pass the pests back and forth like toys. Adults endure the itching as inevitable. Historians still argue whether people connected these tiny parasites with larger plagues, or whether the link was invisible to them, just another misery to accept. The fleas bite, you slap. They leap away. You try not to think of the diseases they carry, plague, typhus, fevers with names too ominous to dwell on before sleep. You imagine how many households ended with a fever that began as a scratch. You curl tighter into your blanket, knowing full well the blanket is their playground, not your shield. Beyond the crawling vermin lies another danger, the food itself. Bread is the staple, coarse and dense, but flour is often stretched with whatever will bulk it up. Bean powder, chalk, even dust swept from the mill floor. Sometimes it's tainted with ergot, a fungus that thrives on rye. Eat enough and you're seized with cramps, hallucinations and burning sensations, so fierce it's called St. Anthony's fire. You picture an entire household writhing in convulsions after supper, each blaming the devil rather than the loaf. Meat is no safer. It's salted to preserve it, sometimes until it's nearly inedible, sometimes not salted enough, and crawling with maggots by the time it reaches your plate. Spices help mask the rot, but not always. The smell lingers. The taste turns your stomach. You chew anyway. What choice do you have? Hunger is as constant as fleas. Fish, supposedly safer, comes from rivers already polluted with waste. You recall the buckets of water sloshed from the pond earlier, the chamber pots tossed into ditches, and wonder how anything that swims could ever be safe to eat. The ale you sip to chase it down is cloudy, sour, and weak, but at least it won't kill you as quickly as the water might. You sit back, clutching your belly, and realize the Tudor home feeds you and poisons you in the same breath. Food is comfort, but also risk. A banquet groaning with sugar sculptures hides rotting meat beneath. A humble loaf might harbor madness in the form of ergot. Every bite is a gamble, every sip a wager with your health. And yet the family laughs as they eat. Children smack their lips, adults praise the cook, neighbors compliment the host. To them, this is abundance, not danger. The risks are invisible, buried beneath custom and necessity. Only you, with your modern eyes and cautious stomach, feel the dread behind every mouthful. The room grows louder now. Voices raised in cheer, mugs clanking, dogs barking for scraps. For a moment the dangers fade into the background hum of life, ordinary, accepted, even cherished. You scratch again, rub your stomach, cough into your sleeve, and wonder how long you could truly last here. Every sense is assaulted, every comfort carries a threat. And yet, as your eyes droop, you realize there's a strange kind of peace in it too. The Tudor home doesn't pretend to be safe. It wraps its dangers in warmth and ritual, presenting poison as medicine, filth as coziness, vermin as company. You sink deeper into the straw, itch and all, until even the scratching feels like part of the lullaby, and the creak of rats in the rafters becomes the softest of bedtime songs. The ale mug is empty, the fire a dim orange glow, and you think perhaps the night might finally pass quietly. But a Tudor house never sleeps. Even in silence, danger hums along the beams, whispering from the walls, waiting in the shadows. Tonight it comes not from sugar or smoke or vermin, but from the very bones of the building itself. You glance up, tracing the lines of the timber frame against the plaster. At first it looks sturdy, reassuring in its crooked charm. Yet every beam is a compromise, every wall a gamble. Tudor houses were often built quickly, with green wood that warped as it dried. Imagine an entire house sagging over decades, its floors slanting, doors sticking, ceilings bowing. One careless gust of wind, one heavy rainstorm, and the structure might lurch like a ship at sea. You feel it even now, a faint tremor when the wind rattles the shutters. And then there are the bricks. Bricks were fashionable, a mark of wealth, but early Tudor bricks were temperamental, fired unevenly. Some were brittle, others too porous. Rain seeped in, frost expanded cracks, and walls wept dampness down to the floor. If the mortar failed, and it often did, the entire chimney stack might peel away from the house like bark from a tree, crashing into the street below. Historians still argue whether Tudor builders understood the risks of such hasty construction. Some towns passed ordinances demanding inspections, especially after devastating fires. Others turned a blind eye, preferring progress to prudence. What mattered was the appearance of modernity. Brick chimneys, glazed windows, timbered facades. The illusion of sturdiness was often enough, even if the reality was a death trap. You imagine lying in bed, half asleep, when the roof groans above you. A storm lashes outside, rain hammering on thatch, wind forcing its way through gaps in the shutters. Then, with no warning, a beam gives way. The sound is sickening. A crack, a rush of air, then the weight of timber and plaster crashing down. Families were buried alive this way, not by fire, not by plague, but by the very homes they trusted to protect them. Even without collapse, the dangers were constant. Damp walls bred mold, which settled into lungs already choked by smoke. Floors warped, leaving gaps where vermin multiplied. Leaks dripped steadily onto beds, soaking straw until it mouldered, releasing spores that made coughs deeper, fevers worse. You shift under your blanket and feel the damp creeping in, cold against your skin. The house itself seems to breathe with you, exhaling smoke, inhaling draughts, pulsing like some tired beast. Children dart across the crooked floor, tripping on uneven boards, tumbling into corners. A mother scolds, a father shrugs, and the play resumes. Broken bones are patched with splints, made of kindling, bruises ignored, scars carried like badges. Safety is not expected here. If anything, the home trains its inhabitants to endure mishap as routine. You, however, flinch at every creak, convinced the next one might be your last. As the wind picks up outside, the shutters bang and the thatch above rustles ominously. You picture sparks from the hearth drifting upward, lodging in the roof's dry reeds. Fire was the great terror of Tudor towns, and for good reason. Entire streets could vanish overnight, flames leaping from house to house as if eager to consume. In London, ordinances demanded ladders and buckets be kept at the ready, but in the middle of the night, with embers glowing, how many were truly prepared? You close your eyes, trying to imagine safety in this space. The beams creak like old bones, the wind howls through unseen cracks. The air tastes faintly of damp plaster and smoke. This is not a fortress, it is a fragile shell, one storm away from disaster. Yet families lived here, laughed here, grew up and grew old within these crooked walls. To them the danger was invisible, absorbed into daily life. You shift again on the straw mattress, listening as the timbers settle with a sigh. The house feels alive, groaning and whispering, a companion that both shelters and threatens. You wonder if it dreams too, dreams of standing tall through storms, or of finally collapsing into the earth. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you realize you're part of its dream now, a guest drifting into sleep beneath beams that may or may not hold through the night. Dawn filters through the crooked window panes, pale light bending around warped glass, and the house wakes with you. The fire is coaxed back to life, and a fresh day begins. You might think morning would bring relief, but the Tudor home has more tricks to play, and this time the danger is in what you eat and drink. The kitchen stirs, the air fills with smells, and you're about to learn that breakfast, dinner, and supper are as risky as they are filling. The table creaks under the weight of bread, cheese, and ale. Bread is the staple, dense, dark loaves cut from coarse flour. It feels hearty, nourishing, but flour is often stretched with whatever the miller has on hand. Beans, peas, even ground acorns find their way into the mix. Sometimes it's adulterated with chalk or clay to bulk it out, leaving a dusty crunch in your teeth. And if the rye has been unlucky, it carries ergot fungus, tiny black sclerotia hidden in the grain. You don't notice until after the meal. When cramps seize your stomach, your limbs twitch uncontrollably, and your vision fills with fire. Ergotism they call it, or Saint Anthony's fire, though you have little comfort in saints when your body feels a flame from within. Cheese should be safer, but it's aged unevenly, wrapped in cloths that harbor mold, sometimes crawling with maggots before you even slice it. Still, you eat it because waste is a sin, and hunger is worse. The ale, brewed weak to be safe for children, is flat and sour, but mercifully boiled in its making. You drink deeply, hoping it will wash down the grit of the bread and the tang of the cheese. Then comes meat. If you're lucky, pork salted so heavily it puckers your mouth, beef so dry it flakes, mutton spiced with pepper to disguise the faint smell of decay. Sometimes the salt is insufficient, and the meat is riddled with worms by the time it reaches your plate. Families poke them out and eat anyway. Hunger doesn't wait for freshness. To mask the taste, cooks douse everything in spices, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, precious imports that cost dearly, but give the illusion of luxury. You chew carefully, uncertain whether the tingle on your tongue is spice or spoilage. Fish is common, especially on Fridays when church law forbids meat. River fish, however, come from streams already fouled with waste and dead animals. Eels writhe in muddy ditches, scooped up and boiled for supper. The brine tastes metallic, earthy, but fills the belly. Coastal towns fare better. But inland the fish are tired, half rotten by the time they arrive. The family eats them anyway, washing them down with more ale, grimacing through every bite. Historians still argue how much of this food was genuinely lethal, and how much was simply unpleasant to modern tastes. People then had hardier stomachs, or perhaps just fewer choices. They lived in a world where safe meant safe enough not to kill you immediately. Long-term effects were invisible, shrugged off as fate or the will of God. If an entire family fell ill after a meal, they blamed the devil or a neighbor's curse, rarely the bread that bore ergot or the fish that spoiled on the journey. You lean back from the table, stomach unsettled, tongue coated in salt and grit. Children lick their fingers happily, adults laugh and trade stories, and you marvel at their resilience. This is abundance to them. Enough bread to fill the belly, enough ale to ease the thirst, enough meat to make a feast. The risks are ignored, swallowed along with every bite. Later, sweets appear again, marchpane sculpted into castles, candied fruits glistening with sugar. You hesitate, remembering the pain already gnawing at your teeth, but everyone else digs in eagerly. To refuse would be rude, so you nibble, the grains crunching like sand between your molars. Sweetness numbs the memory of rot, but it carries its own doom. The meal ends and the table is cleared, scraps tossed to dogs or swept into the rushes for rats to claim later. You sit in the aftermath, belly heavy, tongue dry, head faintly buzzing from ale. This home has fed you, yes, but also threatened you, hidden its dangers in every loaf, every joint, every tankard. You close your eyes and feel your stomach twist. It's not just the food, it's the uncertainty. Every meal is a gamble. You never know whether you'll rise from the table comforted or condemned. And as your head nods forward, drowsy from ale and fatigue, you realize you've survived another Tudor meal, but only just. The day stretches on, and the Tudor house seems determined to prove that even the simplest daily routines can turn treacherous. You rise from the table, sluggish from ale and salted meat, and decide a little warmth by the hearth might steady your stomach. But as you lower yourself onto the stool, you hear the faintest creak above the timbers shifting, and suddenly you remember that comfort here always carries its price. The chimney above, black with soot, sends out a sigh of smoke. For a moment it seems harmless, just a whisper, until the wind shifts and the room fills with haze. Your eyes water, lungs tighten, and every breath tastes of tar. You cough, wave a hand, but the smoke lingers curling around your head like a heavy shawl. Children play nearby, unfazed. They've grown up in this haze, their lungs used to the sting. You, however, are gasping. It feels less like warmth and more like suffocation. Then comes the sound you dread. The faint crackle, not of logs but of soot itself. Chimney fires start this way. A sudden roar when the grease lining the flue ignites. You glance upward, heart pounding, waiting for sparks to spit onto the thatch above. You can almost hear neighbors rushing with buckets, shouting, roofs glowing orange against the night. The fear is palpable, even if tonight the fire holds steady. Historians still argue whether chimney sweeps were common in this period or only later. What's clear is that most households treated soot as invisible, ignoring it until disaster struck. Ordinances demanded sweeping, but ordinances are easy to ignore when life is crowded with chores. You imagine weeks, months, even years of build-up, waiting to burst into flame. And all the while, families gather by the hearth as if it were a trusted friend. The structural dangers are no less frightening. Houses lean precariously, their beams swollen with damp, their plaster cracking in the corners. You run a hand along the wall and feel the cold seep through. The thatch above harbors not just birds and insects, but entire families of vermin, gnawing quietly at the roof. One day it collapses, not in flames but in rot, burying sleepers beneath sodden reeds. To live here is to trust materials that are always betraying you. And yet, Despite the risks, the hearth remains the heart of the home. Meals are cooked here, clothes dried here, stories told here. Children curl in its warmth, dogs sprawl in its glow, parents lean in to talk. Danger fades into background when it is constant. The house creaks, smoke drifts, sparks fly, but life goes on. Later in the evening, a neighbor stops by, shaking rain from his cloak. He leans too close to the fire, his wool steaming, and you catch your breath, waiting for a stray spark to leap. He doesn't flinch. He laughs, cups of ale are passed, and the moment is forgotten. How many tragedies began exactly this way, unnoticed until it was too late? You sit quietly, listening to the murmur of voices, the pop of logs, the drip of rain through the thatch. The house feels alive, shifting and breathing, both shelter and predator. Every comfort comes with a cost. Every warmth hides a threat. The family accepts it, carries on, even jokes about it. You can't quite share their ease. As the night deepens, you huddle closer to the embers, blanket wrapped tight, and tell yourself the walls will hold, the roof will stay, the chimney will not betray you tonight. But as sleep pulls at your eyelids, the uncertainty lingers, heavy as the smoke in your lungs, reminding you that in Tudor Britain, even the safest place, the home is never truly safe. The embers fade to a dull red glow, and the Tudor household drifts towards sleep. Yet you're not safe, not even now, tucked into your prickly straw mattress, wool blanket pulled over your chin. The night has its own dangers, ones that creep quietly, ones that don't roar like fire or sting like smoke. They come in whispers, in scratches, in the restless turning of your own body. First, the vermin. You try to still yourself, to ignore the itch. But the straw beneath you stirs with life. Fleas leap eagerly at the warmth of your skin, their bites sharp, relentless, leaving clusters of angry welts. Lice scuttle through your hair, burrowing, laying eggs that cling stubbornly, no matter how much you scratch. Bedbugs creep from the cracks of the wooden frame, crawling over your ankles, your arms, even your face. You swat, you shift. But the invasion continues. For the Tudor sleeper it was normal, so normal that lullabies sometimes mentioned bugs, as if their presence was just part of childhood. For you, it's torture. The scratching becomes a rhythm, the chorus. The child in the corner whimpers and claws at her scalp. A man snores, then pauses to mutter as he slaps his chest in irritation. The dog twitches, teeth snapping at unseen pests. The whole room is alive with movement, with the invisible orchestra of creatures that claim your warmth as their own. Historians still argue how conscious people were of the health risks, whether they suspected fleas of carrying plague, or whether they simply accepted the misery as unavoidable. Either way, outbreaks of disease followed them like shadows. And then there are the chamber pots, filled quietly in the dark, set aside until morning. The air grows heavy with their odor, mingling with sweat, with the damp straw, with the smoke still lingering from the hearth. You turn your head and inhale stale breath, the faint tang of ammonia, the sourness of unwashed bodies. Privacy is a luxury you do not have. The Tudor household sleeps together. Parents, children, servants, sometimes even animals, all crammed into one room, bodies sharing heat and fleas alike. You try to drift off, but the mattress betrays you. The straw shifts, poking at your side, releasing dust into your nose. You sneeze, stir, and feel the bite of a flea on your ankle. You remember the pond earlier, how easily someone could drown, and you wonder if this might be worse, to drown slowly in itching and stench, night after night, until exhaustion blurs the line between rest and suffering. Outside, owls call. The wind rattles the shutters. Rain drips steadily from the thatch. Inside, you hear scratching in the rafters. Rats again, bold in the quiet, dragging crumbs from the day's meal into their nests. One darts across the floor, tail whipping, and disappears into the rushes. You pull the blanket higher, though you know it offers no protection. Still, the family around you seems content. They're used to this, hardened to it. Their dreams unbroken by fleas or the smell of chamber pots. They find comfort in the closeness, in the warmth of shared breath and tangled limbs. To them this is life, and life is precious. To you it feels like surrender to an enemy you cannot see, cannot fight, cannot escape. As you finally begin to drift, eyelids heavy, the house hums softly around you, the scratching of vermin, the drip of rain, the sigh of sleepers. The Tudor night is not peaceful, but it is constant, a steady rhythm that lulls even as it bites. And in that strange mixture of discomfort and familiarity, you let yourself slide into uneasy dreams, half afraid of what tomorrow will bring, half relieved you survived the night at all. Morning comes again, grey and damp, the house yawning awake with groans of timber and coughs of its inhabitants. You sit up slowly, straw clinging to your hair, the memory of fleas and lice etched into your skin. For a moment you think you've made it, survived another Tudor night, but survival here is always provisional, always conditional. The day ahead promises more hazards, woven into the very fabric of domestic life. Someone places a jug on the table. Ale again. Water is too risky, as you already know, and so weak ale is the standard drink from dawn to dusk. Even children sip from their own small cups. You taste it sour and cloudy, but at least it won't kill you quickly. The bread beside it is hard, yesterday's loaf, gnawed at by rats during the night. The knife scrapes off the worst, and you eat what remains. The casualness of it unsettles you more than the taste. The family shrugs, chews, and carries on. This is normal. By mid-morning, the household is bustling with chores. The floor rushes need sweeping, which means stirring up months of accumulated filth, feathers, crumbs, droppings, scraps of food, even bones lost in the straw. The smell rises in waves, a sour-sweet stench that clings to your nostrils. You cough, eyes watering, while the others laugh at your discomfort. To them, it's just housekeeping. To you, it feels like unearthing a midden heap indoors. Then comes laundry day. A chore as dangerous as it is exhausting. Clothes are soaked in lye or urine, beaten against stones, dragged to ponds or streams. Women bend for hours, backs aching, arms raw from cold water. Children help, carrying smaller loads, always at risk of tumbling in. You picture the coroner's rolls again, the endless drownings, each one a reminder that even washing a tunic could be fatal. You feel the weight of damp linen, the ache in your shoulders, and suddenly the chore doesn't seem trivial. It feels like a gamble with each trip to the water's edge. By afternoon, the air inside grows thick once more. Smoke curls from the hearth, soot gathers on your skin, and the damp walls seem to exhale a mildew stench. A neighbor stops by, scratching at fleas, and shares news of illness in the next village. Another fever spreading, another household struck down. People nod solemnly, but no one looks surprised. Death is never far away here, always lurking in the corners of the home. Historians still argue how much agency people felt they had in this constant struggle. Did they recognize the dangers and simply accept them? Or did they cling to small rituals, scattering herbs, reciting charms, sipping bitter teas in the hope of clawing back control? Whatever the truth, the evidence lies in their resilience. Families endured, children grew, generations past, all in homes that seem to you more like traps than shelters. As evening falls again, supper is served, another round of bread, cheese, perhaps salted meat if you're lucky. The candlelight flickers against the walls, throwing shadows that exaggerate the crooked beams, making the whole house look like it's leaning in, listening to you. You chew slowly, aware of every grit of chalk in the bread, every sour sip of ale, every cough around the table. You realize that here, eating and breathing are both acts of defiance. To carry on is itself the victory. You settle once more onto the straw mattress, bracing for the itch, the smell, the creak of beams. The Tudor home is no fortress. It is a crucible. Every day tests you, every night challenges you, and every morning greets you with new dangers. And yet, as your eyes close, you feel the rhythm of life here pressing in, the laughter despite the filth, the warmth despite the smoke, the meals despite the rot. Life persists, stubborn, ordinary, even comforting in its way. And so you drift again, lulled by the steady beat of Tudor survival, uneasy but strangely soothed. The house creaks, the fire sighs, and you surrender to sleep, knowing the dangers have not vanished but simply wait for tomorrow. The fire has died to its last ember, the house settling into silence. The creak of beams, the faint rustle of straw, even the scurry of rats in the rafters, all of it softens now, blurring at the edges like the fading notes of a lullaby. You lie still, wrapped in your rough blanket, and realize the dangers that felt so sharp a moment ago are distant, dulled by the quiet rhythm of the night. Your body sinks into the straw, the prickles and itches giving way to a deeper heaviness, as if the house itself is pressing you gently down into rest. Outside, rain taps against the thatch, steady and unhurried, each drop a reminder that time flows on, no matter how fragile the walls may be. The air smells of smoke and earth, familiar now, almost comforting in its persistence. You've breathed it all day, and tonight it feels less like a threat than a companion keeping you company. The dangers of the Tudor home, the sugar that rots, the water that drowns, the fires that flare, the cures that poison, drift into memory, becoming no more than stories whispered by the beams. They recede like shadows at the edge of a candle's glow, still present but quiet, unable to reach you here. Your breathing slows. The itch of fleas fades, the cough in your chest softens, and the sounds of the house fold into one another. The sigh of timbers, the drip of rain, the hush of sleepers around you. The Tudor home, for all its hidden killers, has become a cradle of sound and scent, holding you through the night. And as you close your eyes fully, the last ember dims, the walls lean close, and you let go. The dangers will wait for tomorrow. For now, you are safe, you are still, and sleep carries you gently away.